Namaste everyone. I am Gadadhar from International Institute of Vedic Sciences. I welcome once again all the enthusiasts of Vedic Sciences to this Dr. Vedavyas Memorial Online Lecture Series being conducted by International Institute of Vedic Sciences, Rishivatika. Now let's begin today's session with a prayer. Akhanda Mandalakaram Vyaptam Yena Characharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jnananandamayam Devam Nirmalaspatikakrutim Adharam Sarva Vidyanam Hayagriva Upasmahe. So with this, we begin our today's session. Today we have with us Dr. Ashish Pandey from IIT Mumbai, a well-known scholar in the field of spirituality in management, yoga and positive psychology, and business and society interface. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ashish Pandey, and he is going to talk on yoga, the ultimate positive psychology. Namaste, Ashish ji. Welcome to today's talk. Now I'll introduce Ashish ji. Ashish Pandey ji is associate professor, joined Sailesh J. Mehta School of Management in IIT Bombay. Ashish ji completed fellow program in management from Management Development Institute, Gurgaon in India in 2007. His research areas are spirituality in management, yoga and positive psychology, and business and society interface. His research work awarded at forums held in IISc Bangalore in 2006 and 2018, IIM Indore in 2006, Infosys Leadership Institute, Mysore in 2006, Fowler Center in Case Western Reserve University in 2017, Academy of Management meeting in 2019, and Indian Academy of Management in 2020. His research papers, inventory and approach notes have appeared in international journals and periodic like Journal of Management, Journal of Business Ethics, European Review, PEFR Annual of Training and Consulting, Times of India, Economic Times, etc. Professor Ashish ji has been regularly engaged with various organizations and institutions for leadership and organization development work. Ashish ji has been a visiting faculty with IIM Ahmedabad, MDI Gurgaon, and TIS Mumbai. So with this short introduction, I would like to invite Dr. Ashish Pandey ji to deliver his talk on yoga, the ultimate positivity. So, namaste, Ashish ji. Now you can take over from here and speak about the subject.
Thank you. Namaste to all, and thanks very much, Gadadhar ji, for the kind introduction. My hearty compliments go to the Rishivatika, who is organizing Vedavyas lecture series for so many days. I have been personally benefited, really look forward to talks by many eminent scholars, and I am humbled and privileged, honored to be called to share my research work in the field of yoga and positive psychology. These are the small research studies which I'm going to share. they are indication of some of the fundamental questions related to the human mind, which are being handled by the field of psychology in last 100 and 150 years. And being in this field of management, most of my queries were nested in the field of management. So though the context is of the management, but what I'm going to share is drawn from the field of psychology, and it has implication on the field of psychology. If we look at the basic expectations or wish of parents and teachers for the youngsters, for their students and kids and the other youngsters, we want them to be healthy. We want them to be physically and mentally healthy. We want them to be joyful, have high standard of morality. And as a teacher, and I am a teacher, we also expect them to excel academically. So positive psychology, the field of positive psychology, looks at the positive aspects of the experience and characteristics of the human being. Why this is such a special case? Because most of the psychological development, most of the research in psychology was focused on pathologies and problems. And as a result of that, we got to know a lot of things in great detail about anxiety, depression, stress, neuroticism, but there was hardly any substantial knowledge, body of knowledge about love, compassion, wisdom, courage, etc. So recognizing this limitation, and this happened because of some historical reasons, and this is not the occasion to talk about those. Recognizing this limitation, in 2000, the then president of the American Psychology Association, Dr. Martin Seligman, he called for positive turn in psychology. And in his effort to systematize this field, and in his effort to give voice to this concern and prepare a foundation for the further work, he and Chick and Mihai, the great scholar who told this world and did a phenomenal research, very well-known research in the field of flow, they came together and then they edited a special issue of American Psychologist on positive psychology. So that was the formal kind of emergence of the systematization of the field. There were people who were talking about these things at different forums, few of them being Maslow and Eric Fromm, etc. But with this special issue on the American psychologists, things got systematized to a great deal. Since it was coming from the president of the American Psychological Association, there was a sense of credibility and authenticity and recognition of the professional body to take that turn. So if we look at the positive psychology definition, it represents a paradigm that focuses on the strength of people, what is right about them, not what is not working with them, and ways of achieving the optimal functioning and the full potential. The definition of positive psychology itself has been evolving of late in last 2 decades. And in 2014, same authors, they defined psychology, positive psychology, as a science of positive subjective experience and positive individual traits like wisdom, creativity, future-mindedness, courage, spirituality, responsibility, promises to improve the quality of life. So you can see in these two definitions in 2002 and 2014, the definition has become more nuanced because we got to know much more things in detail about what builds the positive psychology. So you can see the power of systematizing the knowledge, power of compiling the ongoing conversations which are haphazard, which are probably disintegrated, the importance of those importance of the integration of those conversations and for taking forward, for establishing and for nurturing the systematic research in that field. If we look at, but I would like to bring your attention to a reaction of a scholar of the to the special issue which was published in 2000. And this scholar was Walsh. Walsh was a psychologist, but also a very thorough practitioner. He was very active psychologist. I mean, he was a scholar, he was doing research, but he was also engaged in the psychotherapy, counseling, and action aspect of the psychology. So right after this issue was published in 2000, in the very next issue, that in his reaction to this special issue, he writes something. And what he writes is kind of a starting point for my research work. What he writes is that I don't think I have ever been excited by the issue of American psychologist as I was by January 2000. And why it was so? Because it was focusing on the positive rather than only the pathologies and discussing topics such as happiness, well-being, and creativity. So he recognizes that he feels happier already, and he applauded the efforts. But in the very next stanza, what he writes is that at the same time, I feel compelled to point to an unfortunate gap. And that gap is about ethnocentrism. What he writes is that issue is ethnocentric and lacks attention to or even mention of the non-Western psychologies and therapies. You may also see some of the research articles as a critique of positive psychology, where they say, is positive psychology a white man's psychology? So same thing he mentioned in the very next issue in his reaction in the same journal, because it does not even mention the non-Western psychologies and therapies, as well as the field of transpersonal psychology, which has worked to integrate Western and non-Western approaches. This is especially unfortunate because it is now apparent that certain Asian psychologies are not only sophisticated systems with effective techniques, meditation and yoga being best known, but also focus specifically on positive well-being and exceptional development. So in his comment, we see that there is not only a recognition of yoga and meditation as a wisdom traditions, which work towards realizing the highest ideals of positive psychology. He also recognizes that these fields are systematic. These cannot be called just colloquial or folk traditions. These are systematic knowledge perspectives. These are the systematic fields of knowledge. They might have developed with the different paradigm. They might be subscribing to different ontology. They might be following different epistemological lenses to understand self, which is within and without. But there is a systematicness, there is a system in this knowledge, in these knowledge fields. And if that system is different from the existing predominant system, that cannot be the basis or reason for discarding it and not accounting it as a knowledge stream, because that will be only causing loss to what all nuggets and the uncut or uncut diamonds of the insights present in those fields. So where, again, the Walsh writes that researchers of positive psychology have a theoretical and practical goldmine of more than 2000 years of exploration of positive psychology on which to draw. And my contribution or my attempt has been just as a scholar, just as a student in this field, to draw a few nuggets and few insights from that 2000 or more than 2000 years of tradition. I am very fortunate to have very bright PhD scholars who are also inspired by the same ideas. And then they also made this agenda their own research agenda. So at the outset, I wish to acknowledge the contribution of Dr. Rajesh Chandwani from IIM Ahmedabad, Dr. Ajinkya Navre, who was the PhD scholar in our school, and now he's a faculty member in IIM Jammu. And with the great satisfaction, I see him establishing a center of excellence for the well-being and happiness called Anandam in IIM Jammu. I am also recognizing the work and contribution of the other team members. First of them being Chirag Dagar, who is also a co-author. He's a lead author in one of our research, and the existing authors, Aditya Agrawal, who is working on the organization healing and the impact of yoga, and Sadhana Sargam, who is looking at the Indian spiritual traditions, paradoxes, and how they can be merged, and how the understanding of this spiritual tradition of India can help us to understand responsible leadership and organizational paradox. So coming to this discussion about the Seligman and Walsh and positive psychology being the white man's psychology and ethnocentric, I would like to bring your attention to this simple comparison. Based on this 2000 article, Seligman and his scholars who have done a great service in making the positive turn in the field of psychology, they kept writing, and they're one of the very next article in 2005 on the similar theme. If we look at the citation, it has more than 7,000. And if we look at the till date, and if we look at the citations of Walsh, this is about 45. That is the last count till today. You can see that though Walsh mentioned about the possibility, there was not much research on the possibility of harnessing the 2000 years old tradition of yoga, Buddhist psychology, and meditation to enrich the discourse in positive psychology. Thanks to these scholars whom I mentioned, and my teacher and guide, Professor Rajan Gupta from MDI, I had this opportunity to explore these ideas, looking at the nuggets there in the wisdom tradition and examining those nuggets in the light of contemporary knowledge and juxtaposing it with the positive psychology. And that's gave me insight and confidence to say that there are unanswered questions about the source of positivity are being answered not only conceptually but experientially in the field of yoga and meditation. And that's why I can confidently say that yoga is the ultimate positive psychology. So coming to our, before describing our tradition, before describing the empirical studies based on which I can say that yoga is the ultimate positive psychology, I would like to bring your attention to the statement of Swami Vivekananda. And these statements are drawn from his very famous lecture titled Practical Vedanta. In the Practical Vedanta, where he describes the practical aspect of Vedanta, he says that Vedanta recognizes no sin. And these are the announcements, these are the declaration of the ultimate positivity of the Vedantic tradition, which is inherently representative of the Indian wisdom and Indian tradition. So Vedantic wisdom recognizes no sin. It only recognizes error. And the greatest error, says the Vedanta, is to say that you are weak, that you are a sinner, a miserable creature, and that you have no power and you cannot do this or that. Again, Swami Vivekananda say that no man can purer and purer. It is a matter of greater manifestation. The veil drops away and the native purity of the soul begin to manifest itself. Everything is our already in finite purity, freedom, love, and power. Vedanta also says that not only can this be realized in the depth of the forest or caves, but by man in all possible conditions of life. We have seen that people who discovered these truths were neither living in the caves nor forest. nor following the ordinary vocations of life, but men who have every reason to believe led the busiest of lives, men who had command armies to sit on thrones and look to the welfare of millions, and all these in the days of absolute monarchy, and not as in these days when king is to a great extent a figurehead. So the faith in the positivity of the human nature, faith, not only the positivity, but the divinity of the human nature is the hallmark of Indian thinking. Yoga provides techniques and also a darshan, a loosely translated and philosophy about this positivity and ways of manifesting this positivity. That's why Bhagavad Gita says that Uddhare Tatmanatmaram Atmano Mavat Satme Atme Atmano Bandhu Atma Veripiratmana. I am the liberator. I am the cause of the bondage, and I am the source of freedom within myself. So there is nothing else. There is no one out there who is deciding my destiny. I have all the potential within. So the role of the spirituality in the Indian tradition is not to get the grace from outside, but manifest our own divinity. And that is the essence of the Vedas. That is the essence of Upanishads. And those aspects are manifested, and these things are manifested with the practice of sadhana, which is being explained in Kriya Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga in the Yoga Sutra. What we see in the form of asanas and pranayam and dhyan are the ways of manifesting that divinity within. It is a holistic process. It is the holistic system which takes care of the behavioral, cognitive, emotional, and energy aspect of ourself. So behavioral aspect, which is yam and niyam, cognitive aspects, which is predominantly expressed in pratyahar and dharana, energy aspects, which are nurtured and systematized in the pranayam and asanas. And we have the liberation, the aspects of the of realization of the oneness in dhyan and samadhi. So the human nature, which is within, which is divine within, can manifest its divinity through the practice or what we call yoga-based practices. So it is not only yoga, but Vedanta also subscribes to this thought, teaches this thought of inherent divinity within. This is one more reason to believe that yoga, whether it is Jnana Yoga or Karma Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga or Kriya Yoga, all are talking about the highest ideals of positive psychology. If we look at the current situation, and I would like to bring your attention to the very first slide where we discussed about what we expect as a parent or as elders or as teachers for our youngsters. We want them to be healthy, we want them to be morally upright, and we want them to be joyful and engaged in the swadhyay, in the academic pursuits. But if we look at the current situation, if we look at the particularly, if we look at the situation about health, and we consider the millennials, they are most stressed, I think more stressed than any other current living generation. They are least likely to give their health care as A grade. So if unaddressed consistently, high stress level may result into chronic conditions like anxiety, insomnia, muscle pain, high blood pressure, weakened immune system, which may even lead to major illness such as heart disease, depression, and obesity, etc. That is the situation about the health. Now look at the situation about the morality. So moral integrity of the global business leaders, I'm quoting this because being part of the management education, this has been increasingly being subject to concern since turn of the century. So we came to know about many scandals in the past and the recent past rather. But apart from such high profile scams, Teaching, cheating, deception, organizational misconduct, and ethical behavior are among the equally formidable, pervasive challenges facing our current business culture. So this so-called small event or incidents of cheating, deception, or misconduct are also rising. And if we talk about the joy, I would like to invite the attention of the teachers in this group. The fundamental challenge for teaching youngsters is to keeping them engaged, making them to enjoy the teaching process and learning process. So inspired by these ideas and looking at these concerns, so at one level we have this inspirational ideas of Vedanta or inspirational ideas of yoga, which talks about the inherent divinity of the human nature. And on another hand, this is the situation of the health, morality, and the joy of our young students, inspired by the great ideas and out of the concern of the current state, I started this research program in 2014. I'm going to share three design most in more detail, three research studies in more detail, which are at the individual level. I will also going to share a collective level study, which is conducted at the level of society, and how the societal level transformations are facilitated based on the yogic processes. That also I will briefly mention. But if we look at the individual design, individual level studies, all the studies are designed on these lines. Phase one of these studies are survey based. They are testing a theoretically derived model of positive psychological mechanisms. So in all the three studies, first we identified what are the psychological mechanism, and here we looked at the positive psychology variables about manifestation of the some positive characteristics like positive engagement, altruistic behavior, creative problem solving, etc. So what is the positive psychological mechanism which is causing these altruistic behavior, psychological, enhancing psychological capital, enhancing hope, etc. So first we traced the psychological mechanism, and then in second phase of the study, all three studies, we gave the intervention which is based on mindfulness and yoga practices. And we saw whether the variables of these mechanisms, do they shift towards the positive aspect, do they shift upward, which and if that shift resulting in the positive psychological outcome. So these are like this is the basic study design being followed in all three studies, which I'm going to share. All three studies are now in the public domain. All are being published in supposedly reputed journals. First of them, which we undertook in 2014 and eventually published in 2018, this was about the morality or moral reasoning. Very briefly, let me explain what is moral reasoning. Moral reasoning is our ability to find out the reason for what we should or should not be doing. So it is not exactly what you do, it is the reasoning behind what we do is called moral reasoning, and that is one of the biggest determinants of our moral behavior. In this context, moral reasoning, we looked at the framework of Kohlberg, which talks about 6 levels of moral reasoning. These 6 levels can be broadly classified into 3 levels: conventional, pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Pre-conventional reasoning is about avoiding loss and gaining benefit. So these are the 2 concerns based on which I decide if I am living at the pre-conventional moral reasoning. Second level is conventional, which is about following the norms of my group or following the law of the land. These 2 logic decide what we should be doing or not doing. And third level, which is post-conventional, it is about fundamental or the most universal values of life. So truth, beauty, and goodness, we all know Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram, the three most profound values of life. And is my behavior or the choice of my behavior or reason to choose that behavior, is that about the truthfulness, goodness, and beauty? Sixth is sixth level of moral reasoning is about looking at my behavior in the universal context. That meaning, if I choose my behavior based on a simple logic, whether if everybody in this world start behaving in this situation, whether this world be a better place. So these are the six levels of moral reasoning. There is a this assessment happens which we used which we used is based on the two caselets, complicated two small but complicated cases. Students or the respondents were supposed to answer 7 questions based on all the cases or both the cases, and there is a 9-step process of converting qualitative responses into quantitative score. This is uh, this became one of the foundational work for the thesis of our scholar Ajinkya Navre, who eventually looked at once few aspects of the moral reasoning here, looked at the impact of mindfulness and contextualized in the form of the at the workplace. So what we found is that if a group practices mindfulness, in few weeks there is an increase in their compassion towards others, and there is a decrease in the egocentric bias. There is also some direct impact, but very minimal. So there is an indirect benefit of these two pathways on enhancing the level of moral reasoning. So what we found that the group which was practicing, and this impact happened only within 6 weeks, only after 6 weeks we looked at the post-intervention assessments, we found that the group which was practicing these contemplative practice, those who are going through the contemplative practices, their score significantly went up from 311 to 349, and the control group was it moved from 313 to 317, something like that. So this study demonstrated that mindfulness practice, which is part of the yogic practice, results into enhancement of the moral reasoning. Second title is about being a hero. And why this study where we use word hero? Because it's an acronym of psychological capital, which is probably the most popular construct in the positive psychology. And that is the acronym of hope, efficacy, optimism, and resilience. We were in this study was serious about, so once this moral reasoning thing was established, we were seriously considering what are the connecting variables, what connects positive psychology and yoga. And based on the existing literature, we could find 2 variables: self-transcendence and subjective vitality. Self-transcendence is about ability to see beyond self. And subjective vitality is sense of energy. So based on the qualitative study and my own personal experience, I can confidently say that the very first experience of practicing yoga is heightened energy. That's the very first experience. And then our ability to look beyond ourselves also increases. So I can feel more connected to the nature. I can feel more connected to others. I can feel more connected to the world. And as a result, I have little more compassion. I have little more concern, little more sensitivity. So that's why Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev also say he has said at different occasions that yoga eases your stubbornness. It enhances my sensitivity and sensibility as well. So there are systematic structured questionnaires available about the self transcendence and subjective vitality. And what we found, again, the experiment group showed a clear enhancement in the self transcendence that resulted into enhanced psychological capital. And when our psychological capital enhances, naturally our altruistic behavior towards others enhances. So in this study, altruistic behavior was not in the experiment design. Altruistic behavior was measured by 4 colleagues of the respondents. Self-transcendence and subjective vitality being the fundamental constructs which are the connecting link between yoga and positive psychology. And this is probably our most, that's what I would like to believe is our most significant statement, most significant, you can say, finding of this work. Why it is most significant? Because self-transcendence, subjective vitality are so fundamental to our energy level. They are not purely cognitive. They are pre-cognitive experiences. So they have so all-pervasive impact on our values, on our behavior, on our day-to-day experience, that these two can be looked at and can be the source of many, many positivities and positive constructs which we study in the positive psychology. So this is another reason that this talk is being titled as Yoga being the ultimate positive psychology. In fact, Tracy Chang, who was the major one of the contributor in our previous manuscripts, which eventually did not publish, she looked at the difference, the effect size of enhancing psychological capital, different interventions. So there were interventions related to the self-dialogue. There was some psychological domain-based intervention about enhancing psychological capital, and she compared the impact of those interventions with the yoga intervention. And she found very clearly that yoga intervention, the impact size, the effect size of the yoga intervention is much more than the pure simple psychological intervention to enhance the psychological capital. Third study is about the joy and academic and the interest of the youngsters, and can we enhance the joy in the studies or in the multitasking amongst the youngsters. So the building blocks of this work are these 4: engagement, multitasking preferences, cognitive ability, and energy in use. So we looked at these variables, and based on these variables, we build our hypothesis and examine those. What it says is that, and the origin of this study was in my observation that as the semester progresses, the students' engagement and students' energy level come down. I'm teaching in the business school since last 11 or 12 years in this school, and I have been teaching in the other schools since 2000. This is a similar pattern. In the beginning of the semester, students are enthusiastic, they want to learn, they are more eager, they are more engaged, and as the semester progresses, their engagement levels come down and their energy level come down. In order to prevent that, I was wondering what can be done. And being personally immensely benefited by the practices of yoga, I thought probably that can be a useful intervention for these students. And what we found is that engagement, whether it is physical, emotional, or intellectual engagement, that enhances, even if it is not enhances, the engagement and energy level do not come down. So when we compared the control group and experiment group, we found that in the experiment group, there was a steep fall in the energy and engagement, whereas the fall in the engagement and energy of the experiment group was non-significant. So though their engagement has not increased at the end of the semester, by the end of the semester, it did not decrease much either. So the yoga based practices had the preventive impact on the engagement. And interesting twist was when we looked at this whole thing in the context of multitasking and cognitive ability. Multitasking is the need of the management education, particularly in the first semester and the first year rather. Students have to go through the rigor of the coursework, and most of them do not have the management background. They mostly in our school, they come from engineering background. So most of the subjects are new to them. So that's an academic requirement. In the very first semester, they have to prepare for the summer placement. And nowadays, summer placement are becoming more and more important for the final placement. Many organizations look forward giving the final job offers to the people who would have done summer training for them. So summer training has become a very important concern for the student, and that selection happens in the very first semester. They also have to participate in multiple club activities because they have genuine concern, they have genuine urge to contribute to these different clubs, different activities to enhance their personality. They have also concern to earn the CV points, and for that also many of them have to engage in many management club related activities, clubs like marketing, economics, IT, operations, etc. So there's a lot of multitasking element in the cognitive ability, and we found that is the reason for the lack of energy or decreasing the engagement. What we found is another variable, cognitive ability. If the cognitive ability, and our hypothesis was that if the cognitive ability is higher, probably people will be more comfortable in multitasking, and then they will probably show less disengagement or lack of engagement towards the end of the semester. But the interesting thing was that the people who are practicing yoga and those who are going through the yoga-based practices and mindfulness, what we found, even if they have comparatively lower cognitive ability, they ended up doing less of multitasking. They were completing one chunk of task and then taking up another task. They remain little more energized at the end of the semester. So here we can say the disengagement caused by multitasking is prevented by yoga-based practices because people don't do multitasking. They may be engaged in multiple projects, but they take one task, they complete one task at a time, and then they move to the next task. And yoga-based practices help them to reduce their urge to do multitasking. And as a process, they were more engaged. So these are the interesting findings which were published in this Journal of Management very recently. Now, mindfulness scholar Dr. Odesha and Christopher Rina, they were the collaborators in this study, not our PhD student in this school. So they were the other collaborators whom I feel thankful to work with. So these are the three studies which tell about how yoga-based practices are the source of positivity, whether it is psychological capital, engagement, moral reasoning, compassion, for many positive, likewise many positive psychological variables. Here I would like to mention another study which is currently going on. I can mention that though it is still going on and not yet in the public domain, but it is being recognized in the Academy of Management. And this study is about the organizational healing. Organizational healing is required. It's a kind of a process where organization regain its earlier state, earlier kind of the operations after a major crisis. And crisis can be like the COVID we had, or crisis can also be industrial unrest. we were fortunate to know about something very interesting being done by the Art of Living Foundation in the Dhamra port. In the Dhamra port, there was a major some industrial unrest, and as a result of that, there was a need for healing in this organization. When we looked at and when we went to the field, we realized and we could sense that Art of Living Foundation, which was teaching a lot of people Sudarshan Kriya, a very energizing yoga-based practice, that became the source and the foundation of healing for the people in that industrial location. So we recognize that yoga is not only helpful in the individual energizing or the individual level positive psychological outcome. If planned well, yoga-based practices can be the foundations of the collective transformation at the organizational level as well. And I would like to again point out that collective level transformation based on the yoga practices was visible in the organization. Me and Mr. Aditya Agrawal, we studied it together in Dhamra. This work was recognized by Academy of Management as the most promising thesis award in the management, spirituality and religion division. So since there is a public recognition to this work, I thought I can share that. Taking clue from the same work, me and some of my friends and the colleagues, we started to look at another transformation, but this was not the organizational transformation. This was a social transformation, which we started studying in the district of Jalna. It's a part of Marathwada region, it suffered from major drought in past years. And the challenges of the farming and farmer, which for which this area is known, many of you must be also aware of. But in this difficult time, we started to look at the cluster of 10 or 12 villages where where Sri Purushottamji, who is a professor of the political science in Jalna in a college, and also an ardent follower of the Art of Living Foundation, he did, and in his leadership, a lot of volunteers worked on de-addiction, organic farming, water harvesting, and many other social initiatives. And for all these initiatives, major driver and the people who were the catalyst for these initiatives, they came from a youth leadership program of Art of Living Foundation. And that youth living and the youth leadership program was based on many other things, which has a very important part, which is Sudarshan Kriya. It's a yoga practice discovered by Sri Ravi Shankar ji. Thanks to this program, we could see a lot of people emerged as change agents, catalysts of the social changes. And there is a remarkable change, as we could see through the series of conversations in that region. Now that, and some of the very clear indication is the crop rotation has changed, the crop pattern of that area has changed, migration has reduced, and the water level because of the rainwater harvesting also has significantly increased in that region. So based on these experiences at the individual, organizational, and at the social level, our team can say that yoga is the ultimate positive psychology, because it is at the source of many variables which are considered to be almost foundational, fundamental in the field of positive psychology. Through this talk, I would like to urge to the management scholars, educationalists, education researcher or psychology researcher, as well as the sociology researcher, to see the possibility of looking at yoga not just as a tool for well-being but also as a tool for transformation. There is also a great possibility to look at yoga as the epistemological tool. And when we look at this as a epistemological tool, we may discover many different scientific methods. The scientific methods which can be better than the existing scientific tools and methods which we are using in the social sciences, particularly in the current times. Ultimately, I would like to say that it is, and this statement is not mine, this statement is again coming from one of my mentors, Dr. Dharam Bhavukji. He writes somewhere that yoga research need not to be like science, but science has to become like yoga. And let me take a liberty to explain this sentence from my side, is that science in the current form is still following the basis of the ceteris paribus. There is an emergence of science which is based on the interpretivism, based on the systemic thinking and systems perspective, but still there the methods are, the tools are externally driven. When science becomes like yoga, science will become more integrative, more holistic, more transformational, and will become more personal. Most of the science as it currently understood is impersonal. So external transformation and inter-transformational are considered separate or different. But if science becomes like yoga, it will be transformative not only externally, but will be transformative holistically, internally as well. With these words, I again express thanks to the organizers of this lecture series for giving opportunity to share the findings of my research team. Thank you very much. If you have few questions, I will be happy to attempt to address those questions. Namaste.
Yes, Ashish ji, it was a wonderful talk, and then you have very clearly explained in 3 of your studies what you have done, different aspects. Yoga is generally known for well-being, but you have also given various aspects on how this can be used in different ways in organizations and social things. You have given excellent example of art of living's initiatives as an organization and also as an in the social domains, how it works well. So, and also your closing words of Dharam Bhavukji, science should become like yoga. I think it's an excellent means a way of looking how the science should start looking at yoga. So I think with these wonderful things, there are a few couple of things, a couple of questions maybe I'd like to take. One question is, so when you said the mindful, practicing mindfulness, so what are the things which are involved in practicing these, if somebody wants to do? So you can briefly mention what are those techniques of practicing mindfulness.
So the practices which we use were the combination of asana, pranayam, and meditation. Mindfulness is only observing our breath and observing sensations. I consider mindfulness techniques, mindfulness methods as part of the Ashtanga Yoga, not other way around. If you want to know exactly what is the protocol being used in our work, I would point out a recent paper in Journal of Business Ethics. We have given clearly what is the protocol. It's a combination of asana, pranayam, and dhyan. It's a 25 minutes protocol, which we have culled out with the help of experts in yoga who have done more systematic study on the yoga practices. So based on their advice, we culled out a short protocol from the Ministry of Ayush protocol. So Ministry of Ayush has given a protocol which is about an hour or so, which we follow in the on the International Yoga Day for doing the collective and the mass practice. From that only this protocol is drawn. That's what is being used in all these three studies.
And a follow-up question to this, and how much time it has taken, let's take, to bring in this positive change in the experiment group when you introduce these techniques?
It took about 6 weeks. In all three studies, the impact was reflected, manifested in 6 weeks.
Oh, within 6 weeks they were able to do it. Okay, very good. Then another thing you mentioned, psychology capital in the organization. So this is something new. I think most of us who are not in the research field are listening to this. So can you just briefly tell how these organizations can use this to or implement these kind of things, the psychology capital which you have mentioned?
Yeah. So psychological capital is the combination of four variables: hope, and these four variables are reflected in the acronym HERO. H for hope, O for optimism, R for resilience, and E stands for self-efficacy. For all these four, there is a assessment available, fairly established assessments, 24 items, longer assessment, 12 items, shorter assessment. Luthans and his colleagues have popularized these terms and has popularized this construct. The emergence of this psychological capital happened by observation of Luthans from many studies where they looked at these four variables. When they were looking at many more variables, these four variables were found to be growing together. So if one increases, another also increases. So there is some special affinity of these four variables, and so that's why this construct of psychological capital came up. And there are many studies looking at the right side of the psychological capital, meaning what all it result into. It result into academic excellence, engagement, courage, leadership, proficiency, all that. So there are a lot of research on the right side of the psychological capital, and there is a tendency of some of the scholars to present this as the ultimate thing. My humble submission and that of my team is that there is a left side of the psychological capital as well. Means there are the sources which are more fundamental, which work at the precognitive level, which are probably not even exact emotions. They work at the energy level. And subjective vitality and self-transcendence, we found, are the two fundamental constructs which impact this. And we haven't come across the interventions, and the interventions to enhance the subjective vitality and self-transcendence are in our yogic tradition. There are not many well-documented and well-tested interventions in the modern psychology about enhancing self-transcendence, subjective vitality.
Yes. And any basic books you would like to suggest to our viewers on mindfulness and basically on mindfulness, which they can go through?
There are many books. If you want to know more about the positive psychology, Seligman's work on flourishing is very good. Authentic happiness is very good. If you are interested in the yoga psychology, I'll strongly recommend you read the book by Professor Rao, Ramakrishna Rao, on the yoga psychology. That can be a fundamental text. You can also find a lot of interesting articles on the Handbook of Positive Psychology and Handbook of Indian Psychology, edited by Cornelissen Matthias ji, Grishwar Mishra ji, Sunit Verma ji, Ajit Dalal ji. So you can look at the Handbook of the Indian Psychology. There you will find some interesting stuff, very useful stuff in the on the yoga impact of yoga and yoga psychology. For the more fundamental understanding about the human self from the Indian perspective, Anand Paranjpe's work is unparalleled. Our generation owe a lot to Dr. Anand Paranjpe to unravel the the insights of the Indian psychology, to understand the self, uh, and he has made it easier for most of us who are trained in the Western education to understand the Indian wisdom and insight from the Vedic or Indian perspective. So, if you want to know about the self, human self from the Indian perspective, Anand Pranjpeji's work is fantastic. The more practical and psychotherapeutic aspects of yoga you can find in the Stephen Parker's book. Stephen Parker has written some of the very interesting and path-breaking books on the psychological aspect, neuropsychological aspects of yoga. So you can look at that. So these are the books coming to my mind, but there can be many others which I
Yeah, I
am not
think,
able to put here.
yeah, yes. Yes. So I think there are no further questions. I think the Indian companies should start looking at these aspects of organization, healing, and other aspects of mindfulness. I think Indian organizations will become more productive and enhanced. So, with these words, I'd like to thank you once again for accepting our invitation to give a talk in this lecture series. And you have made out of your busy schedule, you could spare some time to us. So, with these words, I think we'll close today's session, and we'll again join next week for two more important sessions on management by spirituality. So, with this, I thank once again Ashish ji for joining
My
us.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yes.
It was
And I
absolute
also
pleasure
thank
and
all
privilege
the,
of mine.
yes, sir. So I also thank all the audiences who have joined today on this Rishivatika YouTube channel. If you are not subscribed, please do subscribe to get the notifications. So with a short prayer, we'll close this session. Harihi Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Hunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat.